I'm Evelyn Harper, 48, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the one everyone counted on, but no one ever noticed when I was being pushed aside. I stood in my parents' kitchen, staring at my phone screen like it might change if I blinked hard enough. The banking app had finally refreshed after what felt like forever. My savings account balance glowed back at me, $127.43. Just yesterday, it had been $8,527.43. I refreshed again, hoping for a glitch. Nothing changed. My hands started shaking as I turned to my mother, who was calmly washing dishes at the sink. "Mom, where's my money?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't even turn around. "Oh, that. Brandon needed it for something. Don't worry about it, Evelyn. Kids will be kids." She said it so casually, like she was commenting on the weather. The dish soap bubbles popped softly in the silence that followed. I felt my stomach drop. $8,400 gone. Just like that. I waited for her to say more, to explain, to apologize. Instead, she dried her hands on a towel and turned to face me with this tired expression I'd seen 1,000 times before. It was for a mistake he made. He needed to cover something before it got worse. "I gave him your account information to handle it." My mouth fell open. "You gave him my account information?" Without asking me. She sighed heavily, like I was being difficult. "Evelyn, don't make this into a family problem. He's your nephew." He was desperate. You know how these things are. I stood there, frozen, trying to process what I was hearing. No apology. No urgency. No plan to fix it. Just a warning not to cause drama. I left without another word, my legs carrying me to my car on autopilot. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and burning humiliation. I sat in my parked car outside my apartment, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. That money wasn't just sitting there for fun. It was my surgery deposit, the procedure I'd been saving for over 2 years. The one that would finally fix the chronic pain I'd been living with since my accident. I'd scrimped and saved every spare dollar, working overtime, skipping dinners out, saying no to vacations. Also, I could afford the $9,000 deposit the surgical center required. The surgery was scheduled for 3 weeks from now. I'd already filled out the pre-op paperwork, attended the consultation, rearranged my entire work schedule. And my mother knew all of this. I told her just last month how close I was to my goal. She'd smiled and said she was proud of me. Now I understood she wasn't proud. She was calculating. The next morning, I called my mother and asked calmly about a repayment plan. Surely there had to be some arrangement, some timeline for getting my money back. She actually laughed, this short, dismissive sound that made my chest tighten. "Evelyn, Brandon's young. He's under so much pressure with school and everything else. You're stronger than he is. You can handle this setback. Just figure something out like you always do. Like I always do." Those words echoed in my head long after the call ended. I realized then that this was my role in the family. The reliable one, the problem solver, the backup plan. I wasn't supposed to need things. I was supposed to provide them. I sat down at my kitchen table and pulled out my old bank statements, something nagging at the back of my mind. This feeling wasn't new. I'd felt it before, just never this intensely. I spread the statements across my table, going back 5 years. The pattern emerged slowly at first, then all at once. Small transfers I'd approved, temporarily. Emergency loans that were never repaid. Credit card payments I'd covered, just this once. Every single time my mother had asked. Every single time I'd said yes because that's what reliable daughters do. I remembered my college fund that mysteriously shrank when my cousin needed help. The down payment for my first car that became a family loan. The inheritance from my grandmother that got redistributed for fairness. I was never the golden child, I was the emergency fund. The family ATM. The solution to everyone else's problems. My phone buzzed with texts from relatives, but I silenced it. I needed to think. I needed to stop being reactive and start being strategic. By evening, my phone had 17 missed calls and 23 text messages. I finally opened them, reading through the flood of family opinions. My aunt, "Why are you being so dramatic over money?" My cousin, "It's just a loan, let it go." My uncle, Family is supposed to help each other. And buried in the middle, a message from my mother to the family group chat I wasn't supposed to see, but someone forwarded to me. Evelyn's being unreasonable and unstable about this. Brandon made a mistake, but she's acting like he committed a crime. I'm worried about her mental state. I read it 3 times, feeling something cold and sharp settle in my chest. She was rewriting the narrative, painting me as the problem before I could even speak. The family was already choosing sides, and I hadn't said a word. I turned off my phone and sat in the silence of my apartment. If they wanted silence from me, they'd get it. I spent the next 2 days compiling evidence. Every bank statement, every text message, every email about money. I created a spreadsheet with dates, amounts, and what each transfer was supposedly for. The process was methodical, almost calming. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. What I found made my hands shake. There were transfers I'd completely forgotten about. Small amounts, $200 here, $500 there, that had seemed insignificant at the time. Just until payday, my mother would say. We'll pay you back next month. But next month never came. I found text messages where I gently asked about repayment, met with responses like, things are tight right now, or, I thought you didn't need it urgently. The paper trail was damning. Clear. Undeniable. And it painted a picture I'd been too close to see before. I wasn't helping my family. I was being used by them. When I tallied the final number, I had to sit down. It wasn't just the $8,400 from last week. Over 5 years, the total came to $21,347. $21,347. Money I'd earned, saved, and loaned that had never come back. Some transfers I'd approved under pressure. Others, like the recent one, had happened without my knowledge at all. My mother had access to my account information because I'd given it to her years ago for a legitimate emergency. I'd never revoked it because I trusted her. That trust had cost me more than a year's salary. I sat with that number for a long time, feeling something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't about family helping family. This was about one person being systematically drained while being told she was selfish for noticing. I saved the spreadsheet and closed my laptop. I knew what I had to do. I stopped calling, stopped texting, stopped explaining myself to relatives who'd already decided I was wrong. The silence felt strange at first, like missing a step going downstairs. But then it started to feel like power. My mother called twice a day for a week. I didn't answer. She left voicemails that shifted in tone, first annoyed, then concerned, then angry again. This silent treatment is childish, Evelyn. We need to discuss this like adults. But I was done discussing. I'd spent 30 years discussing, explaining, justifying my feelings while being told they were wrong. Now I was doing something different. I was planning. I was preparing. And most importantly, I was documenting everything. My mother had made a critical mistake in her rush to protect Brandon. She'd forgotten something important about our family dynamic. Something that was about to become very relevant. For the past 8 years, I'd been the one managing my parents' paperwork. Their insurance claims, their tax documents, their Medicare appeals, all of it ran through me because I was so good at organizing. I had legal power of attorney for healthcare decisions. I had their account passwords for emergencies. I had copies of every important document they owned. They'd given me this access gratefully, relieved to have someone competent handling the complicated stuff. And I'd done it without complaint, without payment, without even acknowledgement most of the time. It was just what reliable Evelyn did. But now, looking at that access with clear eyes, I realized something. I didn't just have their trust. I had their financial transparency. Every account, every transaction, every pattern, all visible to me, all documented. I made an appointment with a financial advisor for the following week. No confrontation yet. Just information. Just clarity. The advisor's office was quiet and professional, decorated in muted grays and blues. I brought my laptop, my spreadsheet, and 5 years of statements. The advisor, a woman named Helen, listened without interrupting as I explained the situation. Then she asked to see the documents. We spent an hour going through everything. The timeline, the amounts, the pattern of transfers. Helen's expression stayed neutral, but I saw her eyebrows raise slightly when we reached the total. Ms. Harper, she said carefully, did you authorize all of these transfers? I showed her the text messages, the voicemails, the pressure tactics. The most recent one I hadn't authorized at all. Helen made notes, her pen scratching softly across paper. Then she asked the question that changed everything. Does your mother understand that some of these transfers could be considered financial exploitation, given your relationship and her access to your accounts? The room seemed to tilt slightly. I hadn't thought of it in those terms. Helen walked me through the legal definitions, the patterns that raised red flags, the documentation I'd need if I wanted to pursue recovery. But then she asked what I really wanted. Not what I could do legally, what I actually wanted to happen. I thought about it for a long moment. I didn't want to destroy my family. I didn't want lawsuits or police reports. I wanted my money back. I wanted boundaries. I wanted to stop being treated like an ATM with feelings that could be dismissed. I want repayment, I said finally. And I want it documented. Formally. Helen nodded and started outlining a plan. A mediated family meeting with a neutral third party. Documentation of the debt. A structured repayment schedule. It wasn't about punishment. It was about clarity. About making the invisible visible. About forcing everyone to see what they'd been pretending not to notice. I left her office feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Before the family meeting could happen, I needed to understand one more thing. I called Brandon directly for the first time since this started. He answered on the third ring, his voice wary. Aunt Evelyn? I kept my tone neutral. I need to know what happened. Why you needed $8,000. There was a long pause. Then, quietly, he explained. He'd gotten involved in sports betting through some app. Lost more than he could afford. Grandma, my mother, had found out and told him she'd handle it. She'd given him my account information and told him to transfer what he needed to cover his debts before they got worse. He'd felt terrible about it, he claimed, but Grandma had insisted I wouldn't mind. That I want to help. I sat with that for a moment, processing. Brandon hadn't stolen from me. He'd been handed the means and told it was okay. The real decision-maker had been my mother all along. Did she tell you I'd approved it? I asked. Another long pause. She said you'd understand. I thanked him for his honesty and hung up. The picture was complete now. The family meeting happened on a Sunday afternoon in a rented community room at the local library. Neutral ground. I'd invited everyone. My mother, my aunt and uncle, Brandon, my two cousins. Helen, my financial advisor, came as the mediator. People arrived confused, annoyed at the formality of it all. My mother looked furious that I'd made this public. But when Helen laid out the ground rules, everyone speaks, everyone listens, no interruptions, the room settled into tense attention. I distributed copies of my spreadsheet. Dates, amounts, purposes, and a running total. $21,347 over 5 years. I watched faces change as they read. My uncle's eyebrows shot up. My cousin whispered something to her sister. My aunt looked at my mother with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then Helen asked the question I'd been waiting for. Can someone explain why Evelyn was expected to cover these expenses? The room erupted. Not with anger, with confusion. They'd had no idea the extent of it. No idea it had been happening at a. My aunt spoke first, her voice sharp with surprise. Wait, Evelyn paid for Brandon's tuition shortfall 2 years ago? I thought that was a scholarship issue his parents handled. My mother's face flushed red. She started to speak, but my cousin cut her off. And the car repair? The one we were told was covered by insurance. I stayed quiet, letting the questions pile up. Letting the families see what I'd been living with. One by one, they started asking why I'd been the solution to problems they didn't even know existed. Why I'd been expected to fund emergencies while being told to keep quiet about it. The more they talked, the more defensive my mother became. She makes good money. She doesn't have kids. I didn't think she'd be this selfish about helping family. The word selfish hung in the air like smoke. My uncle shook his head slowly. That's not help, Mom. I don't even know what to call it. Finally, after 48 years of staying quiet, of being reliable, of swallowing my feelings, I spoke. I looked directly at my mother and said the words I'd been rehearsing in my head for weeks. My voice was steady, calm, and clear. I'm not paying for mistakes I didn't make anymore. I'm not covering emergencies without being asked first. I'm not funding anyone's choices while being told I'm selfish for having boundaries. No yelling. No tears. Just certainty. The room went dead silent. My mother's face shifted through several emotions: shock, anger, then something that looked almost like fear. "So that's it," she said, her voice tight. "After everything I've done for you, you're just going to abandon your family?" I'd expected this. The guilt trip. The emotional manipulation. The threat of being cut off from the family I'd sacrificed so much for. But I'd prepared for it too. "If setting boundaries means being abandoned," I said quietly, "then I guess that's what's happening." She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Fine. Don't expect any help from me ever again." I nodded. "I understand." And I meant it. Because I'd already prepared for that exact scenario. What my mother didn't know, what she couldn't have known because she'd stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a resource, was that I'd already begun extracting myself from every unpaid role I'd filled. I'd contacted their insurance company and removed myself as the primary contact. I'd resigned from managing their Medicare appeals. I'd changed the passwords they'd been using for their banking portal and sent them instructions to set up their own access. I'd canceled the automatic calendar reminders I'd set up for their appointments and bill payments. All of it, done quietly over the past 2 weeks while they thought I was just being stubborn. When my mother stormed out of the meeting, making her dramatic exit, I didn't chase her. I didn't beg. I just sat there, feeling lighter than I had in years. My aunt looked at me with something like respect. "You really thought this through, didn't you?" I smiled slightly. I had to. The consequences of my boundaries were about to become very, very clear. The calls started 3 weeks later. First, missed payment notices arriving at their house. Then, a Medicare claim that was denied because no one followed up on the appeal deadline. Then a disconnect notice from their internet provider because the autopay I'd been managing had stopped. My mother called me 7 times in one day. I didn't answer. She left voicemails that shifted from angry to confused to something that sounded almost like panic. "Evelyn, I don't know what's happening with these bills. The insurance company says I need to resubmit something, but I don't understand what. Call me back." I listened to each message, then deleted it. It wasn't cruelty, it was consistency. I told her I was done. I'd set my boundary. Now I had to hold it, even when it was hard. Even when I heard the stress in her voice. Even when my people-pleasing instinct screamed at me to just fix it like I always did. But I didn't. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't. After 6 weeks of chaos, my mother finally asked to meet in person. Not demanded, asked. We met at a coffee shop halfway between our homes. She looked tired in a way I'd never seen before. Smaller somehow. She ordered tea and sat across from me, hands wrapped around the cup like she was trying to warm herself. "I need help," she said finally. "I don't know how to do all the things you were doing." I nodded. Waited. Let the silence stretch. She took a shaky breath. "I didn't realize how much you were handling. I don't know what I thought. That it was just easy for you, maybe." I almost laughed. Easy. As if staying up until midnight filing insurance appeals was easy. As if tracking medication schedules and appointment dates was effortless. As if being the family safety net came without cost. "It wasn't easy," I said quietly. "It was work. Unpaid work that I did because I love you." She looked down at her tea. "I'm sorry." It was the first real apology I'd ever heard from her. But I didn't let it soften me yet. "What do you want?" I asked. She wanted help getting systems back in place. She wanted to understand how I'd been managing everything. And buried underneath it all, though she didn't say it directly, she wanted things to go back to how they were before. I pulled out a folder I'd prepared. Inside was a typed document outlining my conditions. First, a repayment plan for the full amount, $21,347, paid back at $400 per month for the next 4.5 years. The payments would be automatic, directly from her account to mine. Second, a written agreement acknowledging the debt and the terms. Third, complete financial transparency. No more secret access to my accounts. Fourth, boundaries around family emergencies. I would be asked, not told. I would have the right to say no without guilt. Fifth, no more favoritism. If Brandon or anyone else needed financial help, it would be distributed fairly or not at all. I slid the document across the table. My mother stared at it for a long moment, her face unreadable. "This feels very formal," she said quietly. "It has to be," I replied. Trust without boundaries wasn't working. She was silent for what felt like forever. Then she pulled out a pen and signed. The first payment hit my account on the 15th of the following month. $400, exactly as agreed. It felt surreal to see it there, money actually being returned instead of endlessly flowing out. The second payment came a month later. Then the third. Each one felt like a small piece of justice. Not the dramatic, explosive kind. The slow, steady kind that comes from holding boundaries and watching people actually respect them. It clearly wasn't easy for my mother. $400 a month was a significant chunk of her budget. She had to make adjustments, cut back on things, plan more carefully. But that was the point. The money I'd given over the years hadn't been easy for me either. It had cost me opportunities, security, and now a surgery I'd been forced to reschedule. The difference was, I'd never been asked to sacrifice. It had simply been taken. Now the taking had stopped, and the restoring had begun. Slowly, painfully, but steadily. Brandon called me about 3 months into the repayment plan. His voice was tight with anger. "You're really going to make Grandma pay you back? She's on a fixed income, Aunt Evelyn. This is cruel." I let him finish his rant, then asked a simple question. "Did you think the money appeared out of nowhere?" Silence. "Did you think there was no cost to anyone when you took $8,000 for gambling debts?" More silence. "I work for my money. I save it. And it was taken from me without permission. Your grandmother is experiencing consequences for her choices. That's not cruelty, that's accountability." He tried to argue more, calling me heartless, saying family should forgive and forget. But I was done with that narrative. Forgiveness didn't mean erasing consequences. It didn't mean pretending harm never happened. I could forgive my mother and still require repayment. I could love my family and still protect myself. When Brandon realized I wasn't going to back down, he hung up on me. And for the first time, that didn't hurt. It just was. 8 months after our coffee shop meeting, my mother said something that surprised me. We were on the phone discussing a medical appointment she needed help scheduling. At the end of the call, she said quietly, "I'm sorry I used your reliability as a weapon against you." I froze, the phone pressed to my ear. "What?" She took a shaky breath. "I knew you'd always figure things out. Always handle it." So I stopped thinking about whether it was fair to ask. I just asked. Or didn't ask. Because you were reliable, and that made my life easier. It wasn't the emotional apology I might have wanted years ago. It was better, it was honest. It was recognition of exactly what had happened, stripped of excuses or justifications. "Thank you for saying that," I said finally. We talked a little longer. It wasn't a healing moment from a movie, all tears and hugs. It was just real. A small step toward something that might eventually look like a healthier relationship. Maybe. I hung up and realized I didn't need the maybe to be certain anymore. I could live with uncertainty now. I learned to live with a lot of things. I rescheduled my surgery for 8 months after the original date. I'd had to save up the deposit all over again, working extra hours and cutting back on everything I could. But this time my savings account had a password only I knew. This time, nobody had access but me. This time, when I transferred the deposit to the surgical center, I knew it would stay there. The surgery went well. Recovery was slow and painful, but I had time off saved in a support system I'd carefully built from friends who actually showed up without being asked. My mother sent flowers to the hospital, a small gesture, but it meant something. We were rebuilding. Not back to what we were, but into something different. Something with boundaries and respect. Something where I wasn't just the solution to everyone's problems. I was a person with needs that mattered. On the day I got cleared to return to work, I checked my bank account and smiled. The balance was growing. Steadily. Safely. And it was mine. The final payment arrived on a Tuesday morning, exactly 4.5 years after our coffee shop meeting. I watched the notification pop up on my phone. $400 deposited. The balance of my account now read $28,943.67. Not just the original $21,347 returned, but everything I'd managed to save on top of it since setting boundaries. I sat with that number for a while, thinking about what it represented. It wasn't just money, it was freedom. Freedom from being the family ATM, freedom from sacrificing my needs for everyone else's wants. Freedom from the crushing weight of being reliable without being valued. My mother called that evening. The last payment went through, she said. I know. We were quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you for not giving up on me. On us." I thought about that. About what giving up would have looked like versus what I'd actually done. I didn't give up, I said finally. I just stopped accepting less than I deserved. We talked for a few more minutes, then hung up. I opened my banking app one more time, looking at that number. The money was important, but the boundary was everything. I'd learned the hardest lesson of my life. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be used. I'd won. Not dramatically. Not explosively. Quietly. Completely. And most importantly, I'd won without breaking a single rule. I'd simply stopped breaking myself.